Then we'll have to go back up to the body and actually fill out the rest of the body of our creature before we sort of finish up. And I'm thinking for details on the tail tip here, we can add some spiky ridges on the top of the fin, and then repeat the same thing on the underside, and then that should be good. We can even duplicate these circular highlight sections along that inner cutout section so it matches the rest of the body segments. I think that would be a good touch to sort of keep consistent with the design elements. And then we can move back up to the body afterwards. And let's see, we could probably fit 3 of them. Yeah, I think that'll work. And then we just trim out the overlapping sections of the curves, and then we copy over our circular highlight parts. And then that should do there. Now we need to go and finish the main body that's connecting to the tail. And I'm envisioning, since we're creating a sort of aquatic creature, a larger fin up top that we can put in and add some detail. We'll sort of build out the overall body of this thing so it doesn't look quite as narrow before the tail sections sort of start winding around from the body. We'll go ahead and put this in here. And then we can add some additional detail on the bottom. And I think I want to texture the fins in a similar fashion. What we'll do is we'll put some guiding lines up here and here, and then we'll do the same thing on the main fin down here for the body. Keep the lines more or less parallel, and then we'll divide up the sections like so. And then that'll keep the texturing consistent. And then should be in the home stretch for our creature here. Take this and move it off to the side for evaluation once we get done. Now we can do sort of our final checks and see if there's anything else that I want to add before we go to surface creation and color assignment for doing the final render. I think maybe some horns on the top of the head would be a good touch. You'd probably get it with adding a couple on top further back without losing the overall shape that we're trying to preserve here. What we will do is cut out the sections like so, and then delete out the leftover pieces here. And then maybe we can add in a sort of connecting part here so we don't have just empty space. And I think that will do. Maybe we can add a little more texture to this open section here. And I think that'll do for overall shape. Before we go into surface rendering or surface creation and color assignment, let's do a final evaluation check on the piece that we've got here. The starting challenge shape, which again I'll have to scale down a little bit just to match. If we pull it over here, and just sort of slide it roughly in place, the original shape that we used as our base for the design is still visible. In this particular case, it was the head of the creature, and aside from a couple pieces where we added teeth and some spikes, the overall shape is preserved. So I would say that's a pass for the maintaining of the original challenge shape. For the major transformation commands, I am going to make the ruling that the transformation command used in this one is bend. We use bend to create the twists and curved parts of the creature's body. And other than that, aside from our basic manipulation commands like trim and all that, we didn't use any other major commands, so I think that also satisfies that part of the challenge criteria. Overall, I think this is a pretty interesting looking design. I didn't expect that we were going to draw this sort of serpentine eel creature when we started, but that's the whole point of the challenge, to see what pops out after the process starts. We'll go ahead and move on to surface creation and color assignment, and I can talk a little bit about what's different in Rhino 6 compared to the old version. So to recap how we do this, once we have all of our curves in place, we select them all, and then we go up to surface creation and click surface from planar curves. What this does is it takes all of the flat two-dimensional curves and creates an actual two-dimensional surface with the curves. So if you think of the curves as just lines floating in space, the surface creation is creating an actual tangible surface, sort of like paper, across those floating curves. And if we use the shade command, this sort of illustrates what I'm talking about. Before, we would just have closed curves sitting in space, but now they've got a surface applied to them. And if we go to our 3D perspective, you can see the bottom there with our tail segments, they're just curves floating in space. But our actual created surfaces up here where the eel is at are completely flat, they're two-dimensional, but they have substance. And this is what we're going to use for our color assignment. Because this program, like I've talked about in the past, is primarily used for 3D modeling and rendering, that's why you have the ability to do things like this and see if we were creating three-dimensional solid shapes and we wanted to render to see what they look like or shade, it's like a rough draft render, then that's what this would show. It's not terribly useful for two-dimensional design, but if you want to be able to see a an actual rendered representation of what you're doing, that's what the shade command is for. And if we right click the shaded viewport, it'll turn it off. We'll be able to go back and do that here. So now we have our surfaces created and ready to assign color. Now for this particular creature, the challenge rules don't really dictate anything on color. And I think I'm just going to experiment with some combinations and see what I think works here. Now, if we go into the object properties after selecting all of our surfaces, here's where the color assignment is different in this version of the software. And I want to take a couple minutes to just sort of explain, since my tutorials were all based on 4's material assignment, which is a little more complicated now. If we go into the Properties tab, the section we care about is Material. This is where you assign the properties for the rendered surfaces that are going to be created once we actually create an image out of all of our shapes here. If we click on this thing, it looks like a little paint tube. It's asking us to assign properties for all of the surfaces that we've created. In the past, it was just a straight color assignment menu that you assign for all the things you're selecting. What Rhino 6 seems to have focused on instead is creating a master directory of all of the materials that you have assigned for a project. And then when you go to figure out what you want to color or assign, it's picking from that master list. So to illustrate, if I go to use layer material, it's going to pull up all of the created color assignment materials I've done using this particular file. And the file that I use as the base template for the challenge here is my stream file. Basically, when I create a stream image, instead of creating a whole new file and having to assign all of the base properties, I just take the old stream file, save it as a new version, delete whatever was on there, and use that so it maintains all of the settings and I don't have to do it from scratch. As a result, if we scroll down through the list of materials, these are all the ones for this particular file that I've created and assigned to different designs. And this can be kind of handy if you're working from a file and you want to be able to see, okay, I created a color palette for something, but I don't remember what it was. I want to go back to the list and see and figure out, where it is and then assign it accordingly. Now for our creature here, I'm thinking a mix of aquatic and sort of venomous colors would be a neat combination. So for the base, let's go with this custom color, sort of greenish color. If we select it, it's just custom 17. I don't bother naming these things in any manner. Once we've done this and selected that material, what it's done is assigned this color to all the things we have selected. This whole thing is going to be green. And if I want to adjust the color, let's say, for example, we want to go a little bit more teal or sort of off turquoise. We could still do that here, and we can adjust the color assignment, and now material 17, instead of being that sort of dark green, is now this teal color, and it's going to be in the list of custom created materials that we can pull from later if we're using this file. The rest of the assignment parameters here are not things that I use. If you wanted to, and this particularly applies to three-dimensional models and rendering, if you wanted to assign textures, bump mapping, highlights, gloss, reflectiveness, or transparency, you can do that in the custom settings and textures and advanced settings. You can even mess around with the lighting scheme for some of these if you wanted to add sort of an ambient light that's shining down on your model. Again, for our purposes here, since we're working in 2 dimensions, I just have all that turned off. What we want is for the whole thing to render just a flat sheet of paper, as it were, with the different colors. So if we go to our render setting, I'll demonstrate how it's applied the colors, and they'll go into actually customize. We can close this. The render button up here, the blue circle, Let's make sure we're in focus. The render settings that I've been using in 6 are pulled over from 4. I have a 3200 by 2400 resolution dimension for the actual render window. It makes it easy for me to take this and port it over to Photoshop for me to edit into the final image. The DPI, or dots per inch, I think that is, I set it at 200, a little bit on the high side, just so that it renders in fairly high detail. And the quality, this is basically the sharpness of the image / anti-aliasing on the final render. Because I'm taking all of these things and templatizing them for use in other things like our Redbubble store, it's actually better to not have anti-aliasing on at all. And I have it set to the lowest quality because that's what it does. And I'll do the render and show you guys what I'm actually talking about. So here's what our render looks like with just the single color assignment that we did in the properties, and I can zoom in here. By using the lowest quality anti-aliasing setting, what it does is it creates no anti-aliasing along the edges of the image itself. And the reason why I want that is because when I cut these out and stick them into my render templates for uploading and also my shirt templates for Redbubble, if I decide to put something in our store, I want to be able to not have any bleeding along the edges. And for the longest time on my older works, I couldn't figure out why the things I was putting into my shirt template when they were being screened onto products through Redbubble were coming out with sort of this fuzzy bleed along the edge. And at some point I went in and looked at what the actual render was coming out as, and I saw that it was the anti-aliasing setting. So by turning it off, I can cut out this whole thing and put it into a design template and then upload it onto a product, and it won't have that bleed. The overall results on the Redbubble products I've seen since I started doing this have been a little bit more clean. I think it eliminates the problem pretty much entirely, and it's a shame that it took me so long to figure out how it was happening. But overall, I've kept that as a default setting for the renders because it makes it so that I could just pluck this thing out of the render window, put it into my Photoshop files, and then use them for whatever I want to use them, not have any issues. So that's the render settings and color assignment prompts that are different for Rhino 6 compared to Rhino 4. Now what we can do is go in and start customizing our color assignment for our creature here. And I think what I want to do is add some highlights to parts of its body. And I think a good place to do that would be on its underbelly sections and then these joining connecting pieces on the tail. And I will go through the tedious process of manually selecting these, and then I'll explain how the color assignment works for different colors and different materials, since that's also a little bit different. And that has to do with the way they redid the menu commands in the properties section we were looking at before. And I'll kind of explain what that means when we get there, because that tripped me up a little bit when I was trying to render stuff in this version of the software, and then I had to sort of figure it out. And let's see, I think I'll make the inner mouth a different color. Alright, I think we have all of that. If you go back to properties, now what this has pulled up is the settings that we assigned before with this custom 17 and the teal color. In the past, when you want to go in and edit other things and recolor them differently in Rhino, you would just go down to the color settings, choose another color, and you would go. Because they use a central material directory now, if I were to do that, and so let's just say I change this, I'm not going to do it here, but if I were to change this to bright purple, instead of just taking all these sections we've highlighted and coloring them purple, what it's actually going to do is take custom material 17 and change it from teal to bright purple. Therefore, everything in our design would turn purple because it's all assigned to custom 17. And the way you get around that is by creating a unique editable copy. And this is going to create a brand new material. It's going to pop to the list here as 31, 31st material in this file that I've created. But now it's going to treat this as a separate material than 17, which is assigned to everything else. So to illustrate, if I take this and let's say we go for like a venomous bright magenta color, and I go to render, and it's cut off here, but that's fine. Now all of the sections I selected and assigned as a new material have a different color scheme than the main body. It took me a little while to figure out how the program was doing this when I first started using it, because I went in just trying to reassign colors, and every time I'd change a color of the main material, it would change everything on the design, and I couldn't figure out why. And this create unique editable copy was the key there. So if you're going to be creating multiple colors, you have to use this if you want to create something brand new. Alternatively, what I could do is pull from the list of things here, and let's say I wanted to use this light lavender material, number 30. If I select that, then it'll assign these selected sections to material 30, and it'll change their color. Everything else will stay assigned to 17, the way we wanted. So it'll largely come down to whether or not your list or your directory of materials has a color you want, vice creating a brand new material for one you want that's not in the list here. It's something that seems like it's more geared towards 3D material rendering versus just flat two-dimensional design. I would have preferred if it was the way it was before, where you just select something and assign its color and then it does it on the fly. But because it doesn't do that, I had to create a new habit for using the program where I create a new editable copy or pull the other color from the list here, otherwise it would just change the whole thing. But we can go ahead and continue on with the color assignment. Let's do the inner lips and jaws of this creature. And we'll pick some sections to sort of highlight. Before I do that, I want this one to be, yeah, right. Just making sure. I'll select some sections on the head, and then these circular parts of the main body I want to also assign as a highlight. And to recap what we've talked about in the lessons on the program before, to select things in a group, I'm just holding down Shift. If I hold down Control, it'll deselect things in a group. And we will go up to here. We've got green or teal and purple. Let's see if we're keeping in line with the sort of venomous colors. We could do a bright yellow. See how that looks. We'll do a spot check on the render before I move on and do the eye. Okay, I think that'll work. And for the eye, we will go with a bit more of a muted sort of brown color to contrast with the bright color scheme on the rest of the body, and then and with that, here is our final creature for design number 1 of the random shape drawing challenge here. Overall, again, I wasn't expecting something like this to come out, which is usually the way the free drawing process goes. But our original challenge shape is here on the head. We used a modified version of it to create the body sections that we bent into place to create this sort of winding circular shape. And our color assignment with this mix of teals and magentas and yellows sort of finishes the whole venomous sea eel-ish creature here. So I think that's a pretty good result for design number 1. What I'll go ahead and do is save this, and then I'll move everything off to clear the canvas, and we'll do shape challenge number 2. And looking at the clock, this one took about an hour or so to complete, and that's with me talking through a lot of the basic steps of the process and the new commands. I think the next one is going to go much faster. It'll largely depend on what we have to work with and what I decide to do for the overall commands